Hello, I'm Minga. I'm the speaker coordinator for the TEDx event, and I am speaking with Renee and Francis about what she will be doing at the TEDx event and get to know her a little bit more. So please share with us a little more about yourself.
Okay. My name is actually Renee Francis Florin.
Oh,
Francis is my maiden name. I'm a designer. That's my profession. I started out in graphic design and ended up in interior design, web design, custom design, things like that. I've been doing that for years, enough years. Enough years that I know what I'm doing and still have a whole lot to learn because the media is constantly changing.
So is that all you do?
Well, I love doing public speaking. I have a passion for public speaking, which I think I inherited from my father because he was a Lutheran minister when I was growing up. So I think I inherited being on a talking platform from him. I'm very passionate about the source of where my creativity comes from. I've learned a long time ago that creativity does not come from me, it comes through me. And I give the credit where credit is due as often as possible. And I have found that the more I do my everyday life that way, the more I let go, I just let things flow into place, the more peaceful life becomes, the more less turmoil that there is in the world around me, at least in my world. And everything is given to you when you need it. I have a little saying that is, everything I have, I need, and I desire comes to me, that God always provides, because He knows what's best for me. And I breathe that, I live that, and sometimes I have what I call a holy rock. I grab it and I have to force myself to say it, literally out loud, when things in the world seem to be getting too heavy for me, and I realize I'm trying too hard to control them myself. I just need to kind of let go. And I think it works not just with interior design in my world of profession, but it works in anybody's profession. That the harder we don't need to push the river kind of flows on its own.
Right.
And too often we try to push the river along instead of just letting its current carry us. So, and that brings me to what I would like to talk about.
Your topic?
The topic is, I had a brain aneurysm in 1999, and that kind of led me on a journey of discovering what the brain was really all about from a scientific standpoint. We hear so much of it from a psychological standpoint, but it's like scientifically what goes on inside the brain when the brain undergoes trauma. And part of my fascination was learning that it takes 1 year to 2 years for the brain to heal, and discovering that you could have all kinds of fun things going on in there during that time. And they could be major things or very subtle differences that only you notice, that no one else notices. And that kind of, the whole scientific thing ended up turning into somewhat of a spiritual journey as well, because I discovered that there is a little group of cells in the brain, very tiny, the size of a peanut, that controls so much of a person's emotions in their life. They can get, if you've ever met someone that could not let go of something that happened to them in 4th grade, that they let that totally eat them away for 40 years, that comes from that little group of cells. Or a person, that little group of cells also controls a person's ego, if you want to call it that. And can turn what would be a person with good self-esteem into a person with no self-esteem. when the person looks in the mirror and that little voice tells them, you're so fat, you're so ugly, you're such an underachiever. Oh, you don't want to call on them because they're not going to buy anything from you. Oh, don't even bother going to that meeting because you don't measure up to them. That comes from that little tiny group of cells. And I felt that the more I understood what was happening to me from a scientific standpoint, what goes on in the brain, the more you have control of it, because you don't have control, or I don't like control for a word, but you can't understand and work with something if you don't even know that it exists. Right. And so often people don't understand that this little group of cells will get you addicted to a chemical that it sends out a signal for your body to release, for your brain to release. And that's why some people are constantly very negative. There's so many different functions of this little group of cells that the more you understand what it's capable of doing, the more you can control where that comes from. We can't change what we don't know about. So by becoming aware of what was happening in my thoughts after my surgery, the more I had control over some new thoughts and functions that were happening within me. There's a scientist, she's actually a brain scientist by the name of Jill Bolte-Taylor, who wrote a book called, no, I'm not going to be able to think of it, but she wrote a book on this whole, many other things, but she talks about this little group of cells in her book and the different function. And in reading that, I was so happy because it's like, this is the information I'm looking for. These are some of the experiences that I had after my aneurysm. She was a brain scientist who actually suffered a stroke. Wow. So her whole study was, wow, this is how the brain reacts. This is what is going on. And it's fascinating. There's so many aspects of what this little group of cells does that I think if people were just aware that that little voice they hear, this is where it's coming from. And you could actually tell it to be quiet. I've done that before. I'm driving down the highway and suddenly these thoughts are going on and it's like, hey, be quiet. You know, some people may say, hey, get behind me, Satan, or shut up, or, you know, just be quiet, silence. I don't want to hear this. I want to think positive right now. Wow. So that's what I would like to talk about, is that little group of cells that I call the peanut gallery.
That is pretty awesome. So is that why you want people to listen to you, to make them more aware, or is it a little more than that?
It's going to go a little more into depth from that, because part of it is letting go and enjoying life. I find that we don't do that enough. And the reason we don't do that is this little group of cells is always telling you that you're not achieving. This little group of cells wants you to be in control, because it only lives if you are living. But the flip side of that is it's never for you. This little group of cells is always against you. It's never pro you. It's always, someone is always better than you. And yet on the other hand, that little group of cells wouldn't exist if you die. When you die, it dies. When the brain dies, it dies. But its sole survivor depends on you, but you're never good enough for it. And I think that we so often listen to it and we don't sit back and just enjoy life. Just last week, I was talking with a gentleman who I greatly respect, the gentleman I just said hi to here, and John Dickmeyer, and he looked at me and he said, you know, you don't need lists, you don't need printouts. What you need is just to sit back and enjoy where you're at right now. And it was like listening to the angel, that it's like, wow, God had you say exactly what I needed to hear at that moment, because I feel like in my life I'm in a transition time. between what I love and what I do and other interests. And he's right. You know, at that moment, I just needed to be told, sit back, don't worry about it. It's all going to come into play.
Okay.
And life is so much better when you do that. When you laugh at a joke instead of saying, well, that really wasn't very nice. You know, instead of judging it, just laugh at the silliness of life and move on. Once you clean out some of the chemicals that little group of cells produces, and you clean yourself of those, it's amazing how suddenly, instead of looking at the world in very shades of gray, you suddenly see it in full color.
Wow.
So, anyway.
That's awesome.
So I just want to share that. There's just something about the whole process, because it's been a very long journey for me, but it's a journey that starts with a single step.
Okay.
And so often we're afraid to take that first step, or we don't know how to do the first step. So I've loved sharing this part of the journey.
Well, sharing is caring.
It is.
That's awesome. I'm glad that you're taking your time to come share that with other people. I really appreciate that. I can't wait to...
Jill Bolte-Taylor's book is My Stroke of Insight. I knew I would think of the name of it.
My Stroke of Insight.
My Stroke of Insight, yeah.
That's awesome. So how long do you expect your speech to be?
Sharona said like around 8 minutes.
Oh, it's around 18, 20 minutes.
18, 20 minutes, perfect. I will probably keep it real close to 20 minutes.
Okay, awesome. That's great.
I love 20 minutes, yeah. Usually when I go to do a presentation or a talk, usually it's around 30 minutes. When I would teach on Monday evenings, it was usually an hour and a half that the class was. So I've kind of learned how many pages I could do for how long I'm going to do it. So
that's awesome. At least you have a clue.
I have a clue, yes.
That's awesome. So what can we do to make your speech a success in this TEDx event?
I don't know. I really don't know. I guess have an audience is number one. I have an audience that enjoys hearing what I want to say is probably the most important. I don't know. I guess I don't know how to answer that question.
Right. For you to speak on that matter, to make it a success, is just for people to kind of be made more aware, to kind of take a deeper look into things and maybe analyze why they act the way they do themselves and maybe how they can change their lives.
And we can have fun with it too. I'll throw out some questions as we go, just contemplative questions. I'll throw some questions out there because so often we don't realize what it is someone's talking about until an example is thrown out and say, okay, here you go. Have you done this? And suddenly all the light bulbs go off like, oh my gosh, yes, I did that. You know, I did that yesterday or I did that this morning or something.
So hopefully we can turn on some light bulbs